this is how the lab typically goes. We have a topic today, engage eTexts, eTexts more broadly perhaps. We have subtopics. What is it that you have come here to, is there anything specifically you want to learn about the topic or questions you'd like us to explore and to discuss a little bit further? Those of you who have experience with this, share that, good, bad, honest. We try to make this very honest. While I will offer disclaimers, I never sugarcoat what's happening on campus. I think that helps keep this authentic. Any tips or takeaways that we can have, ideas, suggestions, and then we just repeat that until all of our challenges are solved or the time's up. Before we end, I'll try to go back here and recheck and ask if there's any new things that came up. Active teaching labs, I should say, are also done now at UW Milwaukee on Wednesday mornings. So they are currently transitioning to Canvas. So if you want some Canvas help, those are Wednesday mornings. You can watch their live stream. That's what I have. So eTexts in general. Oh, one other thing. This activity sheet. Typically, there's a lot of really great information on here, but because it's in paper form, the links don't work. However, at the very top of the activity sheet, we have instructions on how to sign up, self-enroll in our Canvas course, and there you will find a virtual version, digital version of this with live links. And at the very bottom of these, generally not printed on this page, but on the next page that we will print on one page, there's an opportunity to take notes and to share those out with other people. All right, I think that's all of my intro stuff. So let's talk about eTexts and are there things, who are we and what ideas or points or tips or major questions do we want to make sure that we hit today? Would anyone like to start? And then we'll just go around the room. All right.
I'm Lauren, and I work with a lot of language educators, some of whom don't have a text at all. It's also not always a priority for them to be able to purchase new texts. So I'm curious, I've looked at a lot of the OER options for us, and I'm kind of curious when it comes to having them within Canvas, what that can look like when it's not Pressbooks, because not all of them are Pressbooks. So just kind of, I get what they are, and I get that they're interactive, more so than a regular textbook, but what's a good way to have it within Canvas?
Can you explain what an OER is?
Yeah, I was
open.
just about to.
It's an open
Educational
resource, so like an online textbook that's not through a textbook company, it's
Some
kind of,
professor did it and.
yeah, sometimes they're a little bit fancier than
Okay.
just a professor, but they're free.
Okay,
And some of them actually come with a lot of resources.
Right.
it's like open source or something.
Right, it's like
Yes.
an open source
We
textbook.
will definitely talk about that.
Yeah,
All right,
within the hours.
it's Creative Commons license,
okay.
so you can hack it apart, remix it, reuse it in different ways. And it could be videos as well, like
Okay, yeah.
visualizations,
Yeah.
full courses.
Do you want to go next, or Vicky, and we'll just go around the room? All
I
right.
guess I'll go next. One of my frustrations is using eTexts for quantitative problems and like numerical problems with numerical answers. And my experience both in my class and in my daughter's class is that students spend a lot of time and energy trying to guess like how many significant figures the textbook wants, or, you know, why they got a certain thing wrong because they misread. And a good TA would give, you know, partial credit, 9 out of 10 points or whatever, and instead they give 0 and spend a lot of time trying to debug things that have nothing to do with the course content. So,
I've got some information on that as
good.
well.
okay,
Great.
excellent.
Michelle?
So I'm a recent graduate this year of a fully online program, and it was my first time only accessing text online. And while I hated working full time staring at a screen and then going home to stare at a screen longer, I did see the advantages of like the mobile learning aspect. So being able, because for me, with my schedule, like learning never happened for more than like 15 to like half-hour chunks. So being able to at any time throughout the day when I had time, just pull out my text and like access the content that I needed, it was great. And you know, the back pain of carrying around your textbooks isn't great
Yeah.
either. So
English major, Riverside Shakespeare.
Yeah.
Yeah. Peter?
I'm Peter Van Can. I've been using eTexts for the first time this semester, and I like it, and students like it. One possible disadvantage I've noticed is that the students don't have access anymore to the publisher's website. You know, like usually when you either buy a book in hard copy or buy a book, you know, an ebook directly from the publishers, there's a website with exercises and stuff like that. And so that doesn't seem to be available anymore to the students with this, with the eText that's integrated into Canvas. But I don't know, maybe I'm not, know.
So you're part of the Engage eText program right now?
right. Yeah.
No, you use Pressbooks though, or are you using
No.
Engage in another class?
I'm using them in the same class.
Okay.
No. So, unless there's something I'm missing, and so that.
All right, I'm gonna put that down as one thing,
So,
because this is part of a bigger question of,
yeah.
you know, with the paper textbooks,
Yeah.
you got it theoretically forever, but, you know, it ends up as a moldy pile of stuff in your basement, in a box somewhere probably. And a couple
No, you resell it as soon as you're done.
Yeah, or that. And then you've got outdated elements of it. But Dan,
So my name's Dan LaValle. I'm a learning technologist with the Learning PW team. I'm working on the Engage eText pilot. Soon, a bunch of this work's going to be transitioning to Ander and Mallory, but part of why I'm here is, like, I love hearing about some of the first-person instructor experiences using eText and what they're hearing from their students. So even hearing from former students on their experiences is something I'm hoping to hear more of too.
great. Good.
Jeff Henriquez, I teach in psychology. I'm using eTexts in both my intro psych class and my statistics class. It's nothing fancy. I mean, it's essentially a PDF of the physical book. But I've asked students, I've got data on their opinions about the book, and then I've also looked at test performance between two semesters, one with a physical book and one with an eText.
All right. Chris?
Yeah, I got questions in relationship, a narrower question in relationship to the opt-out process, and how students are communicated with, especially in a course, for example, like mine, which is 100% online, asynchronous, and I get numbers jumping in the first 2 weeks, up and down, up and down. And so all of those students who got summer emails, for example, to opt out, none of them get that. They just sign up for the course 1 week in, and so they can't really, I don't think, make a decision. So I have just a question about, I think it'd be useful to discuss the opt-out.
For the pilot specifically.
pilot
I think
specifically? Yeah, and then even if it's regularized, how does the opt-out work with respect to engaging with students, when they get notified, or how much is the cost, and what are the other options? I do have a bigger, broader question, and I can't remember where it was, but I remember there was a discussion, and I mean, publishing is an industry, right? And somebody used the sort of analogy of our eTexts and the eText movement with respect to the regular publisher provided eText. Is this like the equivalent of resurrecting a 20th century corpse? So are we in universities who are creating these programs, are we actually trying to build up and sustain what should be actually dying or if not dead and be replaced by open educational resources, which are free and have all of the elements of what you can do with respect to eTexts, but don't deal with the issue of funneling monies through to publishers and to professors. And so I adopted the eTexts to save my students money. It works well within the platform. So instead of funneling around $21,000 every term to the publisher, I'm now funneling only about $5,000 to $6,000 a term, which is better. But they also, in the opt-out process, at least in the eText trial, they're all sort of channeled in there, and I have no sense really of that. So I think it's a bigger, broader issue about the political economy of publishing, whether or not we are actually doing the right thing by doing deals with publishers.
Got it. Good. Back row, Margaret.
I'm Margaret. I'm a student in the high school, and I'm here to assist John with the active teaching labs.
Mallory.
I'm Mallory. I work with Dan and Andrew. Like Dan said, we're kind of transferring over control of the support for the Engage project to Andrew and I. And I'm really interested in what people want to do with eTexts in their course. And I also have kind of an interesting background in that I have worked for a publisher before, so I can provide some insight if people have questions about what it's like behind the scenes at a publisher's office. I'm happy to talk about that too.
I'm going to also add Engage versus Pressbooks, because Pressbooks is the other eText option. And in some ways, we can talk about the advantages and disadvantages, pros and cons of the different types of options that we have available. All right, where should we start?
What about Andrew?
Andrew, let's start with Andrew. Andrew, who are you and where should we start?
I'm Andrew Turner. Like Dan and Mallory said, I work on Pressbooks with the Learn EW Madison team, and we're also, Mallory and I are being working up to the Engage eText pilot project. And we should start with OER options in Canvas.
Yeah.
It's actually a good place to start,
It is good.
even though it's, at the top of the
Good place to start. So, open resource option, and let's start with open resource options and then talk about in Canvas. Well, really, Canvas is kind of the tool for structuring educational resources on campus in some ways. So any and all tools ideally flow through that structure. What is available? We talked about Engage, and it can, if I'm understanding correctly, it can be an open resource, but it can also be tied to
All right, I'll
publishers.
jump in.
Yes.
Okay, so on the Learn at UW team, primarily what we do is deploy and support tools for teaching and learning on campus. So the pedagogical strategies that are used or the choices that instructors make are theirs. We're not gonna ever make policy or say, we think you really should move to an OER, even though like I can philosophically, personally say, I wanna do more work to support OERs. So you're right. Engage can be used to deliver an OER text, maybe from OpenText or something like that. You can download that in PDF, you could upload it into Engage and use it. Your students wouldn't be charged a dime to use that open educational resource in Engage. However, part of, this is being kind of being driven from multiple areas, the students are saying, they're telling leadership, textbook prices are crazy. We want you to find ways to reduce the price. So they say, we know we can work with Unison to deliver the Engage program. And so what Unison's doing is they're negotiating prices with the publishers to hopefully lower the price to students. So you can also deliver Engage or eTexts via the Engage tool at generally a lower price than students would be paying via Amazon or even via the publisher directly. So that's all to say that you can use Engage to deliver OERs or publisher text to kind of not force we're trying to give you options as instructors and faculty to use what you want. If you want to use a publisher text, that's one option. If you want to use an OER, that's another option. So Pressbooks is a little different in that it's not just delivering content. You can also use it to author content. And I'm not going to talk too much. I'll let Mallory and Andrew talk a little bit more.
And we do have another active teaching app on Pressbooks specifically coming up. And
All
I
I'll
know
say
that
is,
last one, Peter can come to that, so.
I guess all I'll say is Pressbooks is not used as a platform to deliver publisher content. It's generally used to produce and deliver content on your own, or potentially you could even bring in an OER to Pressbooks. And because of part of OER is giving you some rights to edit and modify, you could edit it. You could like take chunks out of what you wanted to and deliver your own version of the Physics 101 course textbook that's available via OpenText or something like that, via Pressbooks potentially.
A lot of instructors have done that, actually.
So you start with maybe even an Engage eText, which has somewhat static content.
Yeah, I would probably say, so Engage eText, like Dan was saying, it's more complicated because it can be publisher material in there, so you can't necessarily just take something from
Can't take
Engage.
anything.
You have to make sure it's actually an open educational resource. I don't know if anybody here has heard of OpenStax before, but that's a really popular OER that has a ton of different options for textbooks that you can use, not just STEM courses, but they have humanities courses, college level courses, things like that. So it's STAX, Stacks.
You gotta have a crazy spelling to make it easy
Right.
to search.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of options, and I can also say behind the scenes, publishers are creating a lot of question banks based around OpenStax, since people aren't buying their textbooks quite as much anymore, so they will write questions that can be answered from OpenStax material. To try to
So
sell you questions.
you buy the questions to use with the,
The
oh,
free
that's clever.
textbook, yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Wiley.
Yeah, so,
You guys
you
get that,
can-
Wiley?
I worked at Macmillan, so Macmillan definitely does that. But yeah, you can take OpenStax material, which is actually a very good resource because it's written by professors, many of them, and they collaborate with each other. It goes through a review process, which I think is why a lot of people want to use publisher resources because it has some validity to it as opposed to just some random person on the internet who's writing something. May or may not be exactly what you're looking for. It might be wrong and you might not catch everything. So OpenStax is a really good resource. And you can, like Dan said, remix it, put it into a Pressbook or some other location and make it your own. And it's free.
There's a variety of other sort of sites where you can get textbooks. The British Columbia government has done a lot in relationship to OERs, Open BC Campus or BC Open Campus, I think it is. And so on. Do people here know that we have a formal UW-Madison OER strategy?
Where is that?
If you go to the Educational Innovation website, you'll see a section on OERs. And if you go down there, you'll see that there's a formal strategy co-written by, or at least drafted by Carrie Nelson, Still Wagstaff, and myself. And so it's a broader initiative. That said, and this is, I guess, a question for Dan. Our university sort of aspires to do OERs, but we haven't institutionalized it in any sort of serious sense in comparison to some universities. We're doing a lot, and so there it is, full strategic framework document. So it is something I think it's worth sort of discussing. That said, I'm writing or co-editing a OER, a big replacement text to the one that I used on the eText trial. And like everything online, it takes, I was going to say 3 times as much time, effort, and money. It's actually probably more like, I would say in this case, 5 times as much time, effort, and money as I originally estimated.
So I guess one thing I do want to chime in with is just to say, so there's a regular group that meets about openness and OER topics. I was going for a while, but just due to responsibilities. Again, I kind of stepped away. Andrew and Mallory are going, and we're even talking kind of internally in our team about how we want to kind of raise OER as a topic of interest in our department, kind of say, look, we're working on OER topics as part of our consulting. Do we need to have some sort of departmental strategy or buy-in to make sure that kind of leadership is aware and supportive of our engagement in that area?
Is that a comment?
No, there's,
No, it's just an
it's
OER
an OER
working
working
group.
yeah.
We can give you information about it if you wanted to.
Is this the thing we should have a lab on as well?
Yes.
OER.
Oh, excellent. We'll make sure that happens then. Good. So, has everyone seen an Engage eText here, other than me? All right, we're not gonna go into that then. What are, are there any other OER options in Canvas that we are currently sort of looking at or have run across? We talked a little bit about prospects. We're gonna have a whole other lab on that, so I don't want to get into that too
I
deeply.
think, I just mentioned this briefly, Kaltura can also be used as an OER, so say you record lectures for your classroom, that's free content for students. It's not necessarily open, like you're sharing it with the world, but it can be used to decrease the cost for students.
All right. That disclaimer for campuses, I think, is very important.
I was just looking at OpenStax and they seem to be very limited in the types of text they have. It's very core oriented, chemistry, biology, anything slightly different doesn't look like they have.
It's sort of, they're hitting the big,
Yeah, sure.
Those basic gen ed
Yeah.
courses,
Right.
like the 101, yeah.
Just, because it's Creative Commons license, they actually have the capacity, you can download it and just the whole text, like chemistry is right now here, and then reworking it, adding their own content, remixing it.
Right.
And so it's easy to, if you're dissatisfied, well, you need time and money.
Yeah.
and you 5 times more than you think you do.
Yeah.
But at least you can
But
do
you
that.
guys have a place to start if you're teaching
Like a
one of
400
those core gen ed courses. There's nothing in languages, for example.
Oh,
Humanities,
yeah.
the only thing I saw was history.
Well, we've
For example.
developed Portuguese open text.
Yeah, I've seen the Portuguese one.
So what does it take, let's talk about what does it take to put these things in Canvas or online or make an eText. It could just be collect the PDF I hear and then just put it in there. So you can write a Word doc, save as PDF and upload to eText if you hated your students. What else? What else can one do? I see images, of course. In the Engage platform, does it do video or any of the interactive?
Well, there is, the thing that I was interested in Engage initially is that my electronic textbook comes with quizzes that are self-graded. But the first year I used it, I discovered that it gave students infinite answers. So some students were clicking randomly until they got 100%, which is a complete waste of their time and everything.
So this is in Engage eText? Or
Well,
this is
it's
a text,
a
publisher
publisher
one.
feature, but that was done under Engage, right?
okay,
They bought their text through Engage, but it was a publisher provided.
okay, got it.
So,
Yeah, and that's the same, I mean, we have the same issue in Canvas. You can set it, your quizzes so that they can take it 1,000 times,
well, the
trial and error.
publisher didn't let me reset.
Okay,
If
So-
I wrote my own quizzes, which if I were 10 years younger, I might do, if I'm gonna retire after maybe next year, I'm not gonna write my own quizzes and use them once, so, I was kind of, my publisher rep says, okay, fine, you guys are back to hard copy. This is like not working for you. But,
So the locus of control is
Yes.
another
yes.
nice thing about having a remixable
Yeah.
on your own thing.
So I thought I would chime in a little bit because it does get confusing because the pilot's called the Engage eText pilot.
Okay,
There's a tool called Unison Engage,
right?
but there's also these things called we call them Publisher Digital Learning Tools, or DLTs for short.
Okay,
So
Okay, yes.
there are probably at least 10, if not more of them.
Yep.
So you get Cengage WebAssign, Pearson MyLab, and I could just kind of go on.
Yeah, each publisher has their own platform.
Yeah, and so each of these integrate in their own way with Canvas and requires configuration with your course. And the publishers have been developing these as I'll just say as a value add. They want to say, hey, we're going to deliver you the traditional eText, but we're also going to give you this homework system or these quizzes that you don't have to build. We're going to do it all for you.
Right.
The problem that I have kind of on the consulting and support end is like Unison delivers the Engage tool. It's easy to set up and see kind of how it works. It's relatively constrained in what it can do, but I know very confidently that it's working. The publisher tools, we on the back end have much less ability to kind of troubleshoot or see. So for example, when she mentioned the quiz issue, like if you wrote me saying, hey, my students are able to do this, I'd be like, yep, sorry, you're going to have to talk to the publisher. Like I have no ability to go in there or test or check or change anything. So again, like it's been set up in a way to kind of say, hey, faculty, you can choose whatever you want within the set of, like, it's a long list of publishers.
Yeah.
But the DLTs, even though they offer a lot more functionality, are more difficult to support.
Yeah.
So if you want more of that control, then you need to not retire in the next year
Yeah,
or so.
exactly.
And write your own questions
Yeah.
using a tool like Pressbooks and some of the interactive elements within that, or even the Canvas
Yeah.
tools
Like
on there.
one of my younger colleagues asked me like, hey, is it worth switching to eText? And I told him this gripe about the quizzes, and he said, oh, I already have my own quiz banks that I wrote like 5 years ago. I can control them any way I want. Why would I switch to eText and have to use the publisher quiz? And like that's not an advantage.
But you don't have to use
Well,
the
yeah,
publisher
that's
quiz. Yeah,
But-
so like that's the DLT is
Right.
separate a lot of times from the eText,
Yeah.
so it's like two different
That's
purchases there. And then I think, Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, the DLT is also separate from Engage, like you don't actually access it through the Engage tool.
Oh,
That's
okay,
correct,
yeah.
and that's why it's very confusing.
It's
Yeah,
very
because
complicated.
We call
So
it
your
Engage.
colleague could use eTexts
And then just
and
not
their
have
own
the
quizzes together.
Right.
Right. I mean, that's essentially what I do. I don't buy the publisher's learning platform, but I've got quiz questions from their test bank that I populate quizzes, pre-lecture quizzes in Canvas with.
Do you want to plug in and show us some of your data?
Okay.
Or tell us about it, you don't have to plug in.
Okay, so I have two sets of data. So I started using the eTexts in the fall just because it's cheaper for students and they don't like spending money. Given that I was doing this major change and I like data, I also teach statistics besides in-source psych. I decided to use the exact same exams that I had used in the fall of 2017 this past fall. So I was teaching, actually I ended up teaching 3 sections, but I was teaching the same 2 sections of intro psych that I taught in 2017. And so the classes are using the exact same textbook, except an electronic version, and the exact same tests, along with like the questions that I'd screwed up on back in 2017.
And in 2017, they had the hard copy.
They had a hard copy,
Okay.
yeah. In terms of the 2 classes, And we're talking about a total of more than 1,400 students across the 2 years and the different sections. There was a main effect for year in that the kids with the hardcover book did better, but that was really just one of the 2 sections. The other section, there was no difference across the years. And the effect size was so small as to be considered insignificant. The average grade, just in terms of percentages, so I'm just pulling up the actual number so I can give you that data. In 2017, the average grade across the 4 exams was 72.74%, and it was 71.57% in 2018. So
huge hit.
Huge, yeah, huge hit. So basically, it made no difference, which I confess I was not expecting, because I like, something physical you can hold on to.
Yeah.
But hey, that's what the data was. I also asked students midway through the semester, like when I was like in October or whenever we had to like decide what are we going to do in the spring. It's like, come on, we just started using it. But I asked them 5 questions about their thoughts about the eText. And so I asked them about whether or not they thought the cost of the book was reasonable and fair, and 75 to 80% thought, agreed with that. 75% or so felt that it was easy to use. However, only about 35% preferred to use an eText over a physical textbook. Though they also, more than half of them, about 60% recommended that I continue with the eText project.
Let's unpack that. What's going on with that?
They want options.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what my students said, they want options.
Mm-hmm.
And I sometimes wonder if we're gonna do a text pilot, whether or not Unison could have bargained with the publishers, so you have eText in this format and this format. So you can sort of tick, choose which one you want, because some students have said, I'll use it, it's cheaper, I like the access, but I really would like to scribble on my textbook.
Yeah.
And right now, in the trial at least, they get channeled to my decision.
Right, but within the eText, at least with the book that I'm using, students can use the Unison tools to make notes in the textbook.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
They have the option of printing out a hard copy or buying a hard copy, and more than half of them actually realized that they were told that they could buy a physical copy if they wanted to.
Did you ask students if they printed a lot, or?
I have not. I haven't asked them that question. I also have sort of looked to see if at my end of semester survey whether or not they disagree or agree with the statement. I used the. I think Sorry. One of the questions I asked students at the end of the semester is whether or not they think you should be able to be successful without reading the textbook.
Oh, interesting question.
And there are about 40% of students who don't disagree with that statement, but that really hasn't changed much.
See how far you can get through the semester without buying the textbook. That was always my question.
It's like, how do you not? Or they think they should be successful without coming to class.
Well, I have a fair number of students who say, I didn't use the text because your PowerPoints explain what I needed.
Mm-hmm.
Is your text searchable, correct?
Yes,
Your PDF?
yeah.
Because one of the things that really bugs me about eTexts is like somebody someplace spent a lot of time and effort figuring out in what order you should introduce different concepts so that it makes sense and forms an integrated whole. And then you have students who come in and say, oh, on question 17, it asked for such and such. Let me search for that one word and it will get me that
Funny.
one sentence. And I will take that totally out of context, answer question 17, but not learn anything, not learn the concepts that surround question 17.
Well, that kind of
Yeah.
speaks to the question rather than to the learning, right?
Well, okay. But if you can answer by looking up a sentence.
Right.
Yeah.
I can do the same thing on Google, right? I can
Yeah,
Google that
yeah.
and find out that same
Yeah.
information. But you're right, in a well-designed learning activity, there's an arc to it, right?
Yeah,
Where
yeah,
you learn the things here, and then you build off of them to do the next thing, and then
Yeah.
this idea of scaffolding. That sometimes that searchability can be a negative,
Yeah.
right?
well, and the quiz, the publisher features actually encourage that, because like, if you get a quiz question wrong, there will be a place that says, click here to find the explanation of the one thing you got wrong, and take you back to that one like highlighted paragraph.
Oh, and it's definitely like that can be a much better, because if I as a student, I don't have time to reread the whole
Yeah,
textbook, and
yeah.
it doesn't make sense. Rereading has been
Yeah.
shown in learning sciences
Yeah,
to not
Yeah,
be a useful thing. But getting back and hitting that particular thing that I missed out on, I can do the browsing and then say, well, wait a second, I don't get this either, and then I can go figure it out. Searchability is one of the things that I would think would be a huge option, a huge affordance of the eTexts.
Yeah, I mean, as someone who likes to read physical books, I like flipping through the pages
Yeah.
to find what I'm looking for. And I hate looking through a PDF of a book. So the search function, okay, this is the term I'm looking for, and then I get to that
okay.
page. But
Unsatisfying.
and I'm surprised. I mean, the fact that students actually don't find it problematic. I mean, you've got to click an arrow to advance pages. I want to be able to just like scroll all the way through the textbook, kind of the way that I read a book, but that's not the way it's set up. But that doesn't bother them. Yeah, kids. In my day, we had
We have to carry the 50-pound backpack full of books.
through the snow.
But I would probably lean forward if I was $120 versus $31.
Yeah.
I mean.
Yeah.
That's.
Can somebody share their experiences with the fact that, consistency across the years, like if you buy a textbook, it used to be, like you had a code, you can get to end of chapter questions and answers and quizzes and whatever tools that, came with the book that don't seem to come with the book anymore now, unless maybe, I don't know, maybe they sell them separate,
Yeah, they do sell, most textbooks will sell that sort of stuff separately.
And so it's kind of like a cheat, it's like, like you think you get an ebook, but you only get a PDF of the physical thing, and not the learning framework that goes with a textbook. And so I think that's a major disadvantage. I mean, are we doing the right thing for our students? And I would say not necessarily,
And to go to the comment that was brought up earlier, I think this is a way that publishers are trying to stay relevant with the times, because if you package those two things separately, a lot of people don't want to buy publisher books anymore, but they don't want to write 500 questions for a question bank. So having those two things separate, although it might be more of a cost for students or for the university, it's a way for them to be relevant in an environment where OER is the real future of education.
So they remain relevant, but then they still have the proprietary control over the things, which is sort of a heavy counterweight to that.
Yeah, it
And
shifts
to
where the-
Vicky's point of like, I want to change the things around, well, no, you can't. We're writing the question, but we are also then controlling everything about that.
I mean, it shifts where the money comes from,
Yeah.
and so I don't know. I mean, I'm not, not in favor of, presenting students with, a PDF and then say that's equivalent to what you would have gotten,
Right.
when you bought the ebook, in previous years. Because that's just, I mean, it's kind of like, it doesn't seem like that's the honest thing to do.
Sure. But it's, well, I was gonna say it, I guess I'm comparing it to like the textbook. You don't have the tangibility, the physicality of the textbook, but you do have searchability. You do have portability. You can stick it in your pocket and read it on the bus on the way, to class, so that you'll have that ability to do that. Lauren?
So I guess I have a few things running through my head from what I've been hearing. One is, it sounds like this is making the instructor that much more relevant because they have to provide more of the framework. The textbook is becoming something of more of a resource to go back to, kind of like going to a library, which we all did when we were getting our degrees,
Mhm.
right? And I don't know that that's a bad thing. And then the other piece to that is the way that our students get information. We're dealing with a lot of the soft skills. So if we step away from the content and think about when they're in the workplace and they need to solve a problem and they need to get information, how are they gonna go do that? And are they learning how to do that through the digital resources that we're now providing them in our classes?
So this is a really interesting point because, and to Vicky's point earlier, that structuring or the arc or the way that the learning thing was put together in a textbook, the textbook used to be the structuring element of a course, right? For many courses. You got the textbook and on day one, you started with chapter 1. And at the end of the 13 weeks, you were finishing up chapter 13 or whatever it was. And it's no longer that point. It's not linear anymore because we can do the searchability, because we can remix, turn things around, because they have the internet to be able to throw in additional information. Now, what happens to that nice, well thought out arc that may have worked for some people really well, but doesn't always work out great for everybody? Margaret, you got opinions on this?
I love what you're saying. I think it's important to adjust your learning objectives to say that as part of this course, we have the expectation, instructional methods, have changed. And now the onus is on you to provide the framework that works for you. Now, whether you're prepared to do that is another question.
Congratulations, extra work.
But I think if you're gonna change the paradigm, which is what you're suggesting, you've gotta let them know, because otherwise they're waiting, right? The traditional model has been, the professor is going to give us structure, and when it's not there, they think, hey, what's wrong with the instructor? But in fact, you're kind of mentoring them. So I think you have to change the learning objectives up front and communicate that change.
And I think part of it is also the textbook was the authoritative source of information on the topic. And it no longer is. It just can't be. By the time it's published, even as an ebook, it's outdated. And that is a difficult, some disciplines, are more timeless in that respect, but that changes things. So the onus is on somebody else. Now, is it only the instructor, or how much of that 3 to 5 times more can be also shared with the students? And when it is more work for the students, they learn more. They don't like it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But,
Right. But yeah, effort equals learning.
yeah.
I mean, John, I don't think I agree with that completely because, when things were bound to paper, okay, that slowed the process down.
Very
And,
much so.
it's a lot more difficult to be up to date with everything in paper. So that should count really, like the opposite of what you're saying. I mean, if the e-publishing thing, it should be, there's no reason why, it shouldn't be up to date.
And I think that's true for OER materials, because at least for OpenStax, I know that, I worked with the astronomy one really substantially. It gets updated every month. So you have to make sure you always have a correct link for it. So I think for OER stuff, a lot of times it is more up to date than a paper book where you have to wait a year for the next edition to include new scientific advances or something.
So I guess
like
I'm
that.
thinking more of that structured arc of learning, because in order to incorporate, if you've thought well about this process, it is harder to update that with new information on there, because you've got to fit it in somehow, and that takes thought and experience and practice and testing.
But in practice, okay, that arc has been there for years. Like, if you have a textbook that's in the 12th edition,
Yeah.
that arc has been
It's
developed
pretty
over,
polished.
and so I don't buy the argument, actually.
Okay.
Well, one of the things, kind of getting to Mallory's point about, well, the publishers are trying to stay relevant with these question banks and stuff. I think at least in my area where most of the questions are numerical with numerical answers, I feel like it's gonna be 10 to 20 years probably till they're the equivalent of what students get with a TA. So like if we were at a school that couldn't afford a TA, then yes, having automatically graded homework is great. But if students are paying the tuition to come to a place like Wisconsin, I don't really feel right giving them things where like, oh, the question didn't say what bounds to use, you used the wrong bounds, you now got a 0, like,
So
it's gonna be, again, 12 editions of debugging. So question banks are really good and
Right.
well-graded,
I will
so.
say for at least Macmillan, which is who I worked for, the way that questions are structured is, say you have a numerical answer. A lot of times, you have to create incorrect responses that are identified. So students type in the wrong answer, you identify this incorrect answer, and then it provides feedback based on what the error was that those students made. So at least for Macmillan, I know that that's addressed.
Yeah.
For other
Yeah.
publishing companies, can't say anything about
No,
that. But it is possible to provide feedback based on known
Yeah.
incorrect
Yeah.
answers in that way,
Yeah.
but it does lose that TA touch
Yeah.
that they can.
Well, and I
help you work
think,
through it.
at least the ones I've seen, I don't think I've seen Macmillan, but when I tested the self-graded homework in my text, I think I got 3 of the 6 questions wrong that I did for like
Here.
stupid reasons, and just thought, okay, I'm not assigning this is too annoying.
And
then
it
my-
can be, for
yeah,
sure.
Yeah, and my daughter used a platform which I thought was worse than mine, where each question had a significant number of digits expected. It changed from question to question. So as you're going along, it's like, well, it used to be 2 digits, so I'm gonna do this with 2 digits. No, that's wrong. Oh, this one wants 4 digits for some
Right.
stupid reason.
And that's just a poorly written
Well,
question.
she at
Yeah.
one point got a problem where the only way she could get the right answer, she followed along in the help, and she said, oh, they want a 4-digit answer, but at step 3, they drop everything down to 2 digits on the way to their 4-digit answer, and that's the only way to get it right. And then she was wasting her time on that kind of stuff for questions where she already knew the content. And she should have been spending time on, here's the one really hard question that I have no idea how to do. And instead she was like racking up points by trying to psych out the textbook.
Yeah, I know that for a lot of lower level science and math courses,
Yeah.
significant
Yeah.
figures are really important.
Yeah.
Like they want you to
Yeah.
know, oh, it should only have 3 or something
Yeah.
like that. But I will say a lot of questions for college level courses that I have been familiar with,
Yeah.
they don't ever ask for significant figures. And if they do,
Yeah.
they make it another option to, like, they still get
Okay,
it right if
Okay.
they do the wrong significant figures,
Right,
but it's
right.
like, just so you know,
Yeah,
you didn't do it right. So it just
Yeah,
seems like those
yeah.
systems you were using were
maybe, but
not so good.
yeah, I agree, but it's like.
Yeah, but what can you do?
Till we get
Students spend a lot of time trying to figure out what the instructor wants,
Yes.
right?
Right.
That is like the big part of the learning, is not about the content,
Yeah.
but what does the instructor think is important to
Yeah,
follow,
yeah.
right? And in this case, it's like, what does the automatic programmed write responses need to figure out about that? So you get a little bit of that touchiness, and the students hate it, right? I just surveyed a bunch of students, and they said that was one of their biggest gripes about quizzing and things like that. It was like, oh, misspelled this, or I didn't capitalize this, or I
Yeah.
didn't have the right number of
Yeah.
characters after the decimal.
Yeah.
But the other thing is, it does offer a level of consistency that if you have multiple TA graders,
Okay, yeah.
that, you could get some people saying yes or no. Again, trade-offs and
Yeah.
balances, it is
Yeah.
an imperfect system. And I wonder if we're gonna get to the point where, in fewer than 10 to 20 years,
Yeah.
where we're gonna have AI graders that can figure out
Yeah,
and say,
yeah.
all right, well, this range of things is right.
Yeah.
And you got this part wrong, and here's why, and,
Yeah.
all right.
So I guess I'm back to the relevance of the instructor and the TA then. I have done a lot of workshops and presentations on flipping lessons. And typically, what I tell people is you don't have to create everything on your own. Your textbooks and their online materials are really great for the lower order thinking skills, the understanding, remembering, so that you can focus on the higher level skills. So my question, I guess, is what are we really expecting a textbook to do for us?
Is
You
the
know,
textbook
what
only
is
good
its
for those
role?
lower level
And
things?
it may not
Yeah.
be the same role it was when we were learning,
Yeah.
and we need to adapt to that.
Good point.
Yeah.
Just ask a practical question about the way it stands now and where the university is going about the opt-out issue.
Yes.
So how, because I know there's the eText, Engage eText pilot, and then there are Engage eTexts. But, so what is the array of options from a student perspective on opt-outs and instructor decisions?
So this is where I wish Nicole was here, because she's the project manager running the pilot. So she has much more detailed and deep information about the opt-out process, because she processes a lot of those emails. But let me give you my understanding of it, and we can always follow up with Nicole. So in the past, I thought it was 4 emails are sent to students regarding their option to opt out.
For the trial.
Yeah, for the pilot, yeah, exactly. So this is the other thing I should say. In pilot state, everything is done very manually. There's lots of tracking via spreadsheets, lots of literally human beings writing emails back and forth with students who want to opt out to make sure they understand kind of what they're doing. So what happens is kind of long before the semester is upon us, the team gets together and we kind of talk about like, what are the dates that we should send out these emails to students about opting out? And generally, one will be sent really early and kind of but I do know that they send one like right after the start of the semester to try and catch those students who are registering at the last minute or even a few days into the semester. We also do have a KB, not that students are going to be searching on Engage opt-out, but we try to put the information out there. It's also on the Engage pilot website. But I think part of what we're going to be thinking through in the pilot as we're looking at moving this from pilot to production is like, where else does that information need to be? Kind of on the course guide registration page for the site, because right now in the course guide it'll say this course is going to use an eText. I don't remember exactly what the text says, but it'll say like the text will cost about this much. It'll appear on your tuition bill, but it could also potentially say, if you want to opt out, like go here. The problem is there's some students who are in courses using DLTs who say, oh yeah, I want to opt out. I don't want to do that. And if those DLTs are connected to the Canvas course and they're going to get 20% of their grade based on the questions they're doing in the DLTs, well, guess what? A lot of them don't understand, like, wait a minute, you really need, this is a part of your coursework. Like, this is going to cause you big problems. So right now that manual process is a good thing because that lets the team go, hey student, I know you wanted to opt out of Physics 101 eText, but that uses a DLT. Yeah, like we think you really probably don't want to do that. And there are some instructors, I'll just speak generally, who have been very upset, who say they can't opt out of it. I'm using a DLT, it's a big part of my course. They can't pass my course if they're going to opt out of the DLT. But like legally, Madison is bound by law to send out these opt-out notices.
Yeah.
So we get into some fiddling where we're like, well, we'll work with you to see if we can kind of customize that opt-out message for your students so they understand like, hey, we have to tell you about this option, but you need to understand this is a big part of your course. It's a complex area. It's
So you
funny.
can opt out, but there may not be a substitute.
Yeah.
Correct. Yep.
Which doesn't really give them a choice.
I think if it's an engaging text, it's a reasonably, like, you can understand, like, you're moving from a PDF, a searchable PDF online to the physical book, and you're not, it's a reasonable one-for-one replacement. There's not a big problem if a student decides to opt out of that and find a physical copy elsewhere.
Yeah.
But it gets much more complex in the publisher tool side of
With,
things.
those interactive, the quiz ones.
So I guess all I'll say is if you want more detailed information about kind of the dates or how the message goes out, like, let me know and I'll connect you with Nicole or one of us will.
I was more this sort of in the future where, so the pilot finishes with the trial.
Yeah.
So where will campus stand on these sorts of things? How will we engage with our students? What do we tell them in the syllabus? When you're not getting especially the personal.
Right. I think that's a big part of kind of what the team will be working on and trying to figure out like how to strike a good balance between making sure the students understand what their options are. And on the other hand, I'll just kind of speak, I'm not used to doing this, but part of the reason the publishers are able to give the lower prices is based on a high adoption rate.
Yeah.
So if 10 or 20% of students start opting out, so the publishers will say, well, we're not going to give you a 50% price break, we'll give you a 25% price break. So it's always trying to kind of balance those things. And for I guess, for us, we generally, we're advocating for students and faculty. And we're hoping Unison can provide some of that counterbalance to the publishers to get that lower price and at the same time provide students where appropriate that the option of opting out and using a different format.
So some of those other DLTs can be, like, the publishers come up with those. There are also the open source ones. There are ones that are shared from instructors to instructors. And we talked about both OpenStax and maybe in the future there might be some other options available coming out this summer.
I guess one question is, do people think that the main purpose of Engage is cost control or the main purpose of Engage is facilitating learning? Because if it's cost control, there are other methods of cost control. Like one of my classes, it's a smaller class, it's not, 100 plus, but there's multiple editions of the textbook out there. I say you can use any one. If you want the latest and greatest with the unopened software in the back, pay for it. If you want the one that's $12 paperback on Amazon, get that. Use, whatever, get whatever you want. And I deal with the overhead of, okay, you can't just say question 17 because it's a different number in different books. One of my classes, when I was unhappy with the eTexts, the publisher says, tell you what, for cost control, we will sell your students a loose leaf copy instead of a hardbound copy and charge them less. And it's like, okay. So, if the real purpose is cost control, there's other methods besides just eTexts.
Well, and it's not just an either or, right? I mean, there are both some of the
Okay,
advantages of
yeah,
the portability and
yeah,
the searchability, which can be, as we discussed, an advantage and a disadvantage. The cost control would be
Yeah,
another
yeah.
one, and it's a myriad of things.
Yeah.
All right, we've got like 2 minutes left. Are there any last things that we need to make sure that we hit before we call it a discussion? What's the future gonna hold?
That's the magical question.
We can do that in 2 minutes, right?
Well, someday it will be great. but-
Well, and we've been saying that for the
Yeah.
last 400 years or whatever. There are more options now.
Yeah.
And with more options comes more chaos. And more options comes often cheaper prices, but not necessarily because, the price of textbook goes up. The digital ones cost more than the hard copy ones did 20 years ago. But on the other hand, they offer more content and access to content and such. So, yeah. I guess we'll see what happens. Meantime, you write those questions, get your TAs and students to help you write those questions and share it out on the campus commons. Did I say that? Thank you very much. On your way out, if you could just hit those the sheets and check a couple of boxes, and if you have them or not,